Brittney Dumolo was born in 1990. At the age of 29, she was living in Cape Coral, Florida, with her boyfriend Gabriel Pena, known as Gabby, at 4927 Coronado Parkway, apartment number 1, and it's reported they had a very tumultuous relationship. Lauren didn't own a car and often walked places in the area around her apartment. On June 19, 2020, Gabby said when he left for work that morning, Lauren was still sleeping. When Gabby returned from work that day, Lauren was gone, but her cell phone was still in the apartment and she never left home without it. So, he called Lauren's father, Paul, later that night to tell him he was concerned, and this was the first time he had ever called Paul. Her father didn't become very concerned until the next day. Strangely, Gabby didn't spend the next night in the apartment, but instead he stayed with a friend. Another day passed, and when her father, who lived out of state, checked back in with Gabby for updates, he said there was still no sign of Lauren and that he had contacted the police, but they never showed up for a report. So, Paul contacted the Cape Coral police, and they said that they never got a call about a missing person. So Gabby then admitted that he never filed the report, but he told Paul that he would go actually file one that day on June 21st. At this point, it had been 2 days since she was last seen, and Paul starts to become more suspicious of Gabby being involved in his daughter's disappearance because just weeks earlier, Lauren confided in him that Gabby had physically assaulted her. The day before she went missing, she was released from her second involuntary psychiatric hold that month because she had been experiencing psychosis with paranoia and auditory hallucinations. She had to stay longer than 72 hours because she harmed herself during that time because voices in her head were telling her to hurt herself in order to save the world. The first time she was put in psychiatric hold was after she jumped into the Bimini Basin and began swimming towards Four Freedoms Park, where swimming is not allowed, because she thought someone was after her. Once police arrived, she jumped back in the water, but once she got out of the water, she was talking about aliens and voices in her head. Once released, she was prescribed an antipsychotic, but it was never picked up. She was known to use drugs in the past, which is why she had lost custody of her young daughter, Michaela. Her family believed that she had been clean for 2 years besides marijuana, trying to get custody back of her daughter. But Gabby stated that Lauren had relapsed once again and had a low tolerance for drugs. She had problems with heroin in the past, but Gabby and Victor, who was Lauren's mother's boyfriend, said she had started trying synthetic ecstasy, or MDMA, which caused her severe strange symptoms. At the mental health facility, her toxicology report only showed THC and Suboxone, a common opioid blocker prescribed to treat opiate addiction. But they apparently didn't drug screen her until after 72 hours, and drugs such as ecstasy would not be detected after about 8 hours. Ecstasy works by prompting the brain to initiate this fight or flight response, and the user feels refreshed by a burst of energy. It can also distort your experience of reality by influencing perceptions of sight and sound. This could explain her recent erratic and concerning behavior. Not long after being released from the hospital the first time, she began having the same symptoms and was readmitted again for several days. The hospital discovered that she had a chemical imbalance from a recent procedure she had done at a clinic. Before that, she had no known history of mental health problems. When she was released from the hospital the second time, the day before she went missing, she spent the day applying for jobs. She applied at a local convenience store and was caught on surveillance camera leaving with the application. Her sister Cassie spoke to her about 6:30 that evening and said she sounded tired and stated she was worried that she would lose her job at Taco Bell for missing so many days while dealing with her mental health. This was at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and her sister told her she would help her apply for unemployment the next day. 5 days after she disappeared, it was discovered, once all her family became more heavily involved, that a clerical error occurred when Gabby filed a missing persons report, which resulted in no one initially being assigned to her case. Lauren's purse was found by a homeless man on a table at the nearby Four Freedoms Park, the same purse she was carrying in the video surveillance while applying for jobs earlier. The park was located just a block from Lauren and Gabby's apartment. Four Freedoms Park is a place that Lauren often spent a lot of time meditating, and her mother lived across from it as well, and she often visited her. Divers entered the Bimini Basin to search for Lauren but found nothing. Within 2 days of her going missing, her family located what appeared to be pieces of her orange-painted artificial fingernails on the ground outside her apartment. The last text message she sent from her phone read, "You guys coming?" Lauren could only operate her phone via Wi-Fi, and she messaged through an app called TalkU or Facebook. This message was sent the night before Gabby said that he left her asleep in bed after 6 a.m. Friday morning to go to work. Investigators apparently know who the message was sent to, but have not publicly released the name. On July 2, 2020, a shirt was discovered by the waterline at Four Freedoms Park. Lauren's family said it was one of her favorite shirts, and authorities noted it was odd since they had searched that area of the park several times and would have noticed it, so they believed that it was planted there. It also strangely was not very dirty and appeared to have just been put there. 2.5 weeks later, on July 20th, cadaver dogs were brought into Four Freedoms Park. The dogs went straight across the street to Lauren's mother's home. Her mother, Ann, lived there with her boyfriend, Victor. Victor and Gabby worked together and both shared the work van that Victor owned, and at times Gabby used it and actually used it himself without Victor around the time Lauren went missing. The dogs alerted on that van right away. The dogs then went up the stairs to the apartment of Ann and Victor and hit on a curtain. The van and curtain were sent off for analysis. The van showed Lauren's DNA, but authorities said it was determined that the dogs may have hit on the van because it was used to transport old carpet from homes that someone could have died on or from methane gas. Lauren also rode in the van often. Lauren's sister and father reported that Ann and Victor had not been helping in the search for Lauren in the weeks since she went missing and didn't show very much concern, but were definitely defending Gabby during this time. This caused a lot of tension between the two sides of Lauren's family. During the investigation, the maintenance man of Lauren's apartment complex stated that Lauren approached him about 8 a.m. the morning she went missing, 2 hours after Gabby left for work, and stated that she needed help finding an apartment so she could get out of a bad situation. There were other people in Lauren's life that have an extensive criminal record. She was involved with a man named Carl Crow that lived in the same apartment building as her. Crow has been in and out of jail for not only drug trafficking, but for covering up the overdose death of another young woman, Kaylee Masu of Cape Coral, just 2 months before Lauren went missing. Once she was discovered deceased in his house after days of partying, Crow and several others dumped her body instead of calling police because she wasn't the first person to overdose in his home. Although he was behind bars at the time Lauren went missing, his two acquaintances, Jose Rivera and Josh Okapal, were not, and both have lengthy criminal records as well. Josh lived near Lauren and claimed he saw her walking past his apartment about 10 a.m. the morning she went missing, and they had waved to one another. Another person of interest important to mention is a man named Shannon Ryan. Shannon is a self-proclaimed witch, and he ran a Facebook group known as Lightworkers of the World that Lauren and her mom frequently interacted with. He was arrested and charged with murdering Leila Cavett in Florida and leaving her 2-year-old son wandering alone at an apartment complex. Up until his arrest, all his Facebook posts on the Lightworkers of the World page were positive and inspiring or about chakra and astral projecting until all of a sudden they weren't. Instead, they became very threatening right before he was arrested. Lauren's mom, Ann, died of COVID-19 while in the hospital fighting sepsis just a few months after Lauren went missing. 4 days later, Lauren's stepmom, Tracy Dumolo, passed away. Strangely, the day Lauren's mom, Ann, was sent to the hospital after being found unresponsive in her bathroom, she had a visit from the same maintenance man that saw Lauren the morning she went missing. So he may have been the last person to see Lauren before she went missing and the last person to see her mother Ann before she became deathly ill. It is of note that while hospitalized and barely responsive, she strangely mumbled his name, Michael. Turns out another twist exists. Michael, the maintenance man, and Gabby both previously lived 12 miles apart in Racine, Wisconsin. Although it could be a simple coincidence, they both ended up in Cape Coral, Florida, intertwined in the same missing persons case. As usual, law enforcement most likely has evidence that they just can't tell Lauren's family or the public about because it could hinder the investigation, which I imagine could be super frustrating to her loved ones. Lauren's father, Paul, along with her siblings and the rest of her family, have not given up hope of finding Lauren, and as of March 2022, this case remains unsolved. Brooke Samantha Cady was born in Billings, Montana on August 12, 1981. Brooke spent junior high and high school years in Laurel, Montana, and graduated in 1999. Brooke participated in multiple sports in school and would play in the summer softball league every year. She was just an all-around athletic person who lived a very healthy lifestyle. She loved the outdoors, and one of her favorite places was Yellowstone National Park. She was attending college and was enrolled in the paramedic program. She worked at Famous Staves for 7 years and continued working there while she was going to school. On December 31, 2009, she gave birth to a son she named Caden. The father of the child was Corey Alvarado, who she had met on a blind date 2 years earlier. After dating for a while, Brooke moved into Corey's house on Dry Gulch in Emerald Hills, Montana, which was across the street from his parents, Victor and Lori Alvarado's home. When Brooke went for her 6-week checkup after giving birth, the appointment went fine and she was healthy and doing very well. However, Brooke and Corey's relationship had taken a turn for the worse, and she was planning on taking Caden and moving back home. Not only had her and Corey's relationship become strained, she also did not get along with Corey's mother, Lori. In fact, she was downright scared of Lori. Then on March 8, 2010, Corey allegedly found Brooke in bed not breathing. Did he call 911? Yes, but allegedly only after calling his mother, Lori, first. Apparently, Brooke had been deceased in her bed for several hours. While an autopsy was inconclusive, it did reveal some chemicals in Brooke's tissue that are commonly found in oil fields. As it turns out, Corey had supposedly been working in the back-end oil fields for an oil company and had been in the lab with chemicals. Strangely, Corey's family completely cleaned out the house immediately after the sheriff's department left and hauled everything to the dump, according to witnesses. Corey's mom then hired a defense attorney right away for him and allegedly refused to cooperate with the investigation. A rumor was spread that Brooke died of an infection caused by dental work, but according to her family, this is simply not true. Brooke's family states that Corey and his family have sadly refused to allow them to see Caden since her death. Corey has since remarried, and Brooke's family begs for him and Lori to speak with the investigator. Brooke's case is still open at Yellowstone County Sheriff's Department, and as of March 2022, this case remains unsolved. Megan Kristen Curl was born Megan Romero in 1973. In the year 2000, she was living in Lufkin, Texas, in the Fox Run Apartments. She was described as outgoing, kind, and fun-loving, and was diagnosed with a very mild mental disability in the 1st grade. Growing up, Megan was bullied because she was a little different. Her mother said she'd always come back with a kind word for them. As an adult, she was known to be naive and overly trusting of men. She married at the age of 18 and lived in Arkansas for several years but would divorce because of abuse. Her mother, Sherry McClung, said that men often took advantage of her daughter, preying on her loneliness and vulnerability. She said that it was obvious to others that Megan wanted to be loved and accepted, and this made her an easy target as she was very outgoing. On the night of March 25, 2000, 26-year-old Megan was out dancing at a club called the Electric Cowboy. The bar was a place that she often went to and was known as a regular. But this night, she was seen talking to a man who other regulars would say was a new face in the bar that they'd never seen before. He was seen spending a lot of the night talking to Megan and buying her drinks. At some point that night, however, she was asked to leave because of her provocative dancing. She left the bar and went to a club called Sports Shack down the street from the Electric Cowboy. Megan was seen in Sports Shack talking to a number of people, and then she was ready to go home, so she accepted a ride from one of the bar's employees. He dropped her off at her apartment building just after 1:30 a.m., where she then got into a conversation with a friend and fellow tenant in the building who had waited for Megan to get back. While the two women were talking about Megan's evening, the friend said that a car suddenly sped into the parking lot and came to an abrupt halt. Megan indicated that the driver was a man she'd met earlier, and the friend went back inside the apartment building. When she came back outside, she noticed the car was still there, but didn't see anyone in it or see Megan. Her friend then became worried and went upstairs and knocked on Megan's apartment door at 2:30 a.m. Megan answered and claimed to be fine, but the friend noticed that the driver of the car was inside the apartment. Megan's friend would say, "She said I was right, it was my friend from the club, and I looked down to him, and he just nodded his head slowly and didn't say a word, and I didn't speak to him at all either. I said, 'Well, are you sure you're okay?' and she said, 'Yes, I'm fine.'" Less than 2 hours later, at 4 a.m., firefighters responded to a report of smoke and fire at the Fox Run Apartments. Inside apartment 616, Megan's apartment, they found Megan deceased, an obvious victim of a brutal homicide. Dental records were required to identify her. Her friend and neighbor that saw the man in Megan's apartment right before she was murdered was able to assist in a sketch being made of the suspect. He was a young white man with blonde hair and a baby face, wearing gold-rimmed glasses and a mustache. Since Megan's murder, police have interviewed dozens of people and investigated several suspects. In 2012, a retiring Lufkin police officer stated that they believed they knew who killed Megan but didn't have enough evidence. At one point, the prime suspect was an ex-boyfriend of Megan's named Tim Purvis. Before she died, she had testified about him being abusive, which led to his parole being revoked. He was released from prison about 1 week prior to her murder. However, he had an alibi for that night. Tim died on June 19th after apparently falling off a water tower in Hudson, Texas. Witnesses say he fell off a water tower that had recently been completed and then refused medical treatment and was taken to his home, where he later died in his sleep. It's been nearly 22 years since Megan's life was tragically cut short, and as of March 2022, this case remains unsolved. Tamra Jewel Keepness was born September 1st, 1998, a twin to Tamra. She is of Aboriginal descent and was born to Troy and Lorena Keepness, who later divorced. She was a young White Bear Nations girl and described as loving, smart, and brave. She liked playing Mario Kart on Nintendo and climbing her favorite tree down the block from her house. At the age of 5, Tamra lived at 1834 Ottawa Street in a shabby brown and white 2-story with a windowed porch at the front in Regina, Saskatchewan in Canada. Many of the women and girls who lived or worked in the area were First Nations like Tamra. In the home also lived Tamra's mother, Lorena Keepness, her mother's common-law partner, Dean MacArthur, and her 5 siblings. The Keepness home was less than a block from the Oksana Center, a halfway house for federal parolees. The house was also near Salvation Army's Waterston House, a shelter for former inmates and men struggling with addiction and mental health issues. A bar with a notorious reputation called the Earl Hotel was within walking distance of the home. The area was frequented by drug users and sex workers. Lorena and Dean struggled with addiction to drugs and alcohol, and domestic violence was prevalent in the home. Lorena herself grew up in a dysfunctional home with abuse and neglect, which rolled over into her adult life. After running away from White Bear Nation at the age of 14, she lived on the streets until the birth of her first daughter, Summer Wind, at the age of 20. She then had her son Rain Dance not long after. Then the twin girls, Tamra and Tamara. Since Lorena and Troy both struggled with substance abuse, their lives were sometimes too troubled and unstable to have the children with them. Once, the girls had arrived to Lorena's in the middle of the night after walking several blocks from their father Troy's home. Crisis and social workers received over 50 reports of abuse, neglect, and drug and alcohol use in the Keepness home. Sadly, being around illegal activity and violence was also second nature to Tamra and her siblings. In 2004, Dean had served 3 months in prison for brutally beating Lorena while drunk. Social services had been involved with the Keepness family, and at least once the children were removed. Tamra was briefly cared for by a loving foster mom and arrived showing signs of physical and possible sexual abuse. But the foster mom died of whooping cough, and Tamra went back into the system and ultimately back at the home with Lorena and Dean. On July 5, 2004, Tamra and her 5 siblings were watching TV when Tamra went upstairs to go to sleep about 11 p.m. with her 2 brothers aged 3 and 10. Earlier in the night, at around 8:30 p.m., Lorena and Dean, both drunk, got into an altercation, which they commonly did, and Dean left the house to go drink with a friend named Russell Sheepskin. Sheepskin often spent drunken nights in the house Tamra lived in, and on this particular night, his girlfriend had kicked him out. Dean and Sheepskin said they left to go buy a dime bag and baby formula. They stopped by the house to drop off the baby formula for Lorena and Dean's 9-month-old baby, then left again to go to a bar. They went to the St. Regis Hotel, about 6 blocks away from the house. Sheepskin said he was so drunk he couldn't even remember dropping off the milk. He said he began blacking out at the park across from the hotel. Meanwhile, Lorena went to the store to buy alcohol and returned to tell her oldest child, 11-year-old Summer, to watch the other 5 children while she left to go to a friend's house a block away to drink. Lorena told Summer to keep the doors locked and not open them for anyone, and to call her if anything happened before leaving around midnight. Around 2 a.m., Sheepskin returned to the house blackout drunk, made something to eat which he later didn't recall, and stated that he saw Tamra, Summer, and Tanis asleep in the living room. He and Dean had been drinking at a bar and then at a park before going their separate ways. When Dean arrived home, Sheepskin was smoking a cigarette on the front porch. A violent altercation then occurred between the 2 men. Dean brutally beat Sheepskin for unknown reasons, resulting in a broken window and blood on the porch. But it is highly speculated the reason for the altercation is because Sheepskin had harmed Tamra, although both men have insisted that the fight was unrelated to Tamra. After the fight, Sheepskin went out the back door, leaving it unlocked to walk to the hospital to get stitches, while Dean said he set off to sleep elsewhere. Dean stated that he had been headed to his aunt's house, which was several blocks away. However, it took him more than 2 hours to get there, and he says this is because he got lost and went to her old house before remembering she had moved. He claimed that he kept blacking out on the way there and had arrived at his aunt's house at 5:30 a.m. and passed out on her couch. Some people speculate that the 2 men were disposing of her body at this time. Soon after Sheepskin and Dean's altercation, Lorena arrived home after 3 a.m., heavily intoxicated, and for some reason entered through a window, then passed out on the couch. She later stated that she saw 2 of her children, Tanis and Summer, asleep in the living room, but she did not see Tamra. At 8 or 9 in the morning, Lorena woke up and opened the front door to let Summer and Rain out so they could walk to summer camp at a local rec center and let their grandmother Lois inside. Lorena then got back on the couch, recovering from a bad hangover. At 10:30 a.m., Lois became concerned that Tamra had not come downstairs for breakfast, so she sent one of the other children to tell her to come eat. But Tamra was nowhere in the house. 8-year-old Rain said he had gone to bed squeezed into the space between the wall and mattresses piled on the floor in an upstairs bedroom. He told his mother he felt Tamra get up at some point, and all he could remember was that it was light outside. If this is truly the case, that means Tamra didn't go missing until daylight, hours after Dean and Sheepskin left the house after the altercation. After 2 hours of searching for Tamra, her mother reported her missing. Hundreds of police and volunteers combed the neighborhood for any signs of Tamra. Nearly 13 hours had been unaccounted for between the last time Tamra had been seen by her mother and siblings and the time that she was reported missing. Some officers accompanied trained volunteer search teams, and others questioned family members and potential witnesses, going door to door, gathering leads, or chasing down tips. The RCMP Training Academy provided cadets, and members of the public soon began arriving on their own to help. Thousands of tips poured into police hotlines. Lorena and Dean provided authorities with the names of 5 people they thought might be suspects, including a pedophile who had befriended Tamra. Her mother was also suspicious of a woman nicknamed Big Auntie. She didn't know her real name, but she stayed at their house using different aliases and had lied about being pregnant. She apparently left the area around the same time that Tamra did and never returned. Tamra's father, Troy, was notified about his missing daughter and arrived very concerned. He returned to the house one night weeks later with a baseball bat and confronted Dean. Troy was ultimately charged with assault, though Dean later said that the police got things misunderstood. Immediately following her disappearance, police set up a command center bus in the parking lot of a nearby church. Much of the neighborhood was filled with overgrown yards, empty houses, and piles of garbage, an easy place to hide a small child. Searchers worked in grids, knocking on doors, inspecting old junk cars and garages, peering under discarded mattresses and piles of wood, and looking down manholes. The area in the neighborhood around Tamra's home reportedly had a foul odor following her disappearance. It's possibly due to the trash pickup being stopped by police while all the bins were checked during the middle of the summer, but some wonder if it was decomposition. Elders had told police they had visions of the child near rocks, water, and trees. However, no search has ever turned up with Tamra. After a week of searching, law enforcement began to interview local sex offenders and viewing CCTV footage from local bus stations and businesses. They determined that the multiple comings and goings from the house that night had not been fully explained. Tamra's 5 siblings were removed by social services due to the instability of the home. On July 19th, Dean was charged with assaulting sheepskin on the night Tamra went missing and served 6 months in prison for it. A prison guard confessed to the police that she and a former inmate had stolen a van, kidnapped Tamra, and then burned the vehicle after disposing of the girl's body in a ravine on Moscow-Patong First Nation land. After a week-long search of the area, the guard admitted she had lied and had just been trying to get her abusive boyfriend locked up again. In 2014, a Reddit user with the name My Secret Is Out posted an eerie hand-drawn map of Moscow-Patong tribal land to the Regina subreddit titled, "The Location of Tamra Keepness, Check the Wells." The user later stated that the map had been drawn by their late grandmother, who apparently had obtained the map from her sister in Alberta, who had visited someone in prison. The RCMP investigated a series of wells on Moscow-Patong land, but turned up no evidence and determined the lady was suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Some believe that Tamra may have wandered from the house that night into the alley behind her house and was kidnapped from the streets. Sheepskin died January 1st, 2009, taking any details about what happened that night, and Dean and Lorena have maintained their innocence in Tamra's disappearance. Lorena has heard many theories about what happened to her daughter. She has repeatedly said that someone stole Tamra because she was so smart. Tamra's family members insist that she was taken from the house by a stranger that night. Some believe Tamra wandered away and was abducted by a driver cruising the area, or that she got lost, then crawled in somewhere so small she has never been found. Other theories focus on the adults in the house that night. Some officers will say off the record that they think Tamra is in the dump, but they just couldn't find her due to the mountains of debris. The suggestion she could have had something to do with her daughter's disappearance still pushes Lorena to the point of violence. One night, she was at a bar and some women near Lorena began loudly saying to one another that she had sold her kid for dope. They were saying that she had all those babies so she could just sell them for drugs. Her friend told her not to listen, but Lorena couldn't ignore it and threatened the women. They met at the same bar again the next day, and that time they fought. One of them had a knife and slashed Lorena twice on the back of her arm. Another night, she was once again attacked in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. Lorena and Dean remained on and off again for years following Tamra's disappearance. Sadly, she has never been found, no one has been arrested, and as of March 2022, this case remains unsolved.